welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. I'm Mike Indovina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Jonathan O'Brien, and if you're not familiar with him, he is a producer, mix engineer, and multi-instrumentalist based out of Idyllwild, California, where he operates a studio called The Music Box. And that studio is really cool. It's actually a hybrid studio where it operates as both a recording studio and a creative retreat as well. So in this episode today, we definitely dive into that idea of running a retreat studio, what that looks like, what the pros and cons are with that, and everything in between. And as part of that, we also get into some really interesting topics that, although they aren't necessarily mixing related, they certainly make a major impact in terms of your creativity, your focus, and as a result of all of those things, they're ultimately going to allow you to make better decisions in a mix or in a production. So we definitely cover a lot of ground as it relates to that. Then we also dive into John's focus on minimalism in productions. He's the kind of guy who likes to use as minimal processing as possible. But when you listen to his mixes, you wouldn't know that because everything is just so clear. So we dig into how he actually goes about achieving that, and we discuss how his process is so crucial for making that happen. And with that focus on minimalism, this is a really refreshing conversation, and it really reminds you of how far you can get with just a little bit. You know, you don't need the latest and greatest tools. You don't need to have a ton of gear. As you'll hear in this interview here, sometimes just focusing on the simplest things will end up yielding the best results. So yeah, this is a really great conversation. I'm excited for you to dig into this. So let's just jump into it. Jonathan O'Brien, thank you so much for being on the Master Mix podcast. How's it going today, man?
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for reaching out.
Of course.
It's going good. Just did a mix revision this morning and just kind of settling into it.
Nice. For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and ultimately how you got into everything you're working on these days?
Well, my name's John O'Brien. I live in Idyllwild, California, and it's a small mountain town. The closest city that's most notable is Palm Springs. I'm like technically 10 miles away from Palm Springs, but it's an hour down the mountain. But I'm 2 hours from LA, San Diego, or Orange County. So a lot of my clients live in LA, and I've kind of been able to build a studio here, and there's a bedroom and a place for people to stay. So tend to like have people here 3 or 4 days at a time. And moved up here late 2020, and this is like my 4th or 5th studio. I've been dabbling in recording for probably 20 years. And actually having like a commercial studio and trying that side of things for probably close to 15. But yeah, so that's kind of quick background.
How did you get into production and music in general?
Just started just kind of playing in like punk bands in middle school and high school. And I don't remember easy access to like studios. It felt like there was only like a couple, and those seemed very out of reach. And I would just kind of start, classic, like my friend had a 4-track like Tascam, and we were just like trying to figure out how to do it without reading the manual and just
no one ever reads manuals.
No, definitely not. I mean, I actually think I remember the first kind of like recording thing I was trying to do. I don't remember how old I was, but it was like a karaoke machine, and it had a purple microphone, and I remember trying to record a song that I had like quote unquote written when I was 12 or something like that. But no one in my family was a musician or anything like that, so it was a slow start for me, for sure.
Nice. So it was all just kind of like out of necessity. You started with this to record yourself. Was it all self-taught, or did you eventually like have any sort of training?
I've had a couple internships, but those came later on. Those came when I was in my early 20s, and I learned a lot from that. But they were very they were very cool internships. They weren't like at like a big studio or anything like that. They were just with a couple producers that they had made a couple records that I really loved, and I reached out. One of them was Raymond Richards. He did one of the early Local Natives records, Gorilla Manor, and he was working with a lot of LA artists at the time, and he's up in Portland now. And then the other was Chad Copeland, who is in Oklahoma, and Chad Chad's been like a really great mentor over the years, and we still like, I'll still hear a record he does now and reach out and be like, how did you do that? You know, because I just really have always loved what he does. And he's worked with a lot of smaller bands, but like he's also worked with Third Eye Blind, and some of the records I really love are Bronco or Broncho. He's made like almost all their records with them, because that was kind of part of the crew I was hanging out with in Oklahoma, and those records just sound incredible, like one after another. They're just so cool.
Nice. That's awesome, man. Well, you talked about how now you've gone through a bunch of different iterations of your studio, but now you have a place that you're working out of now that is kind of like both a retreat and studio, so people can stay there and all that. And so I was curious to dig into that a little bit. Like, first off, what made you want to have like a retreat style studio instead of just a standalone place?
I think I was just very tired of having to pay rent at a studio and pay rent at home. You know, coming up on COVID, my wife and I, we have twins. Then they were 3 at the time, and I was in Orange County, which is just a very expensive place to live in California, and it just felt like such a dead end financially. So Idyllwild is a really great town, and it has this way of staying small over the years, but it is only 2 hours from LA, 2 hours from Orange County. So you still, like, if someone invites me to a concert tomorrow, like, I could be there, you know? I don't feel like completely removed. But part of the idea of building a studio up here was, you know, cut down on the cost of living, and hopefully, just like really fingers crossed, that people would continue to want to work with me even though I was further away. And that really has been the case. It's been really positive, and my clientele went from being maybe 90% Orange County locals and like 10% LA, and now it's about 100% LA, which has been really great. And there's just a lot of great musicians in LA, so it's really nice to have a little bit of a circle and like word of mouth that people come up here and they enjoy being here. And it's very different from LA, so it's nice to have the contrast for the artist. And I firmly believe that this studio would fail if I didn't have essentially free lodging for the artists. But it was a no-brainer, and I'm so glad that like my wife pushed to like have that part of it be just as comfortable and thoughtful as the studio is, you know, because my brain was just very like studio focused when it came to the build.
Of course, yeah. I mean, definitely having a supportive partner, that's important, especially for a retreat style studio like that. Yeah. So
that's
awesome.
Hopefully this is the last studio I ever have, and we never bought this house with the intention of like upgrading at any point. So kind of went all in with the studio, and like I said, it's been really positive. It's been 4 years now. Yeah, coming up on 5, I think. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I imagine that like, yeah, it's definitely a nice getaway for people that are in LA, right? Like it's so busy out there all the time. So for people to just go a couple hours and have a place to stay, peace of mind of like, we're getting stuff done, we're going to get the record done, no distractions, that kind of thing. I could see how that could be a pretty positive experience for artists coming to you. Yeah.
It's been really nice to get that feedback.
Nice. Do you find that having people stay at your studio, or is it your house as well?
So the living quarters are in the studio. Basically, it's a 950 square foot garage conversion essentially, but the garage was very strange because it had been like added onto over the years by previous owners, which is why it's so big for a typical garage. And basically the left third of it is like the living quarters. It's like it's almost like a tiny home. Like, you know, there's a little kitchen area, bathroom with a shower, and then a bedroom with some bunk beds, and then like the couch folds out in the control room, you know. So
Nice. Do you find that it's like difficult to like balance your personal time versus studio time when you have people that are basically staying there all the time?
No, it's been really positive. I think one of the things I've done right in my career is once I was married, and especially once I had kids, I've essentially worked like 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. for the last like 12, 13 years. So I'm very good at just like being like, all right, I gotta go. It's dinner time in the house, and the clients are really understanding of that. And I don't really find too many people like infringing on my privacy. It helps that the studio is a separate structure. But yes, my house is 15 feet away, you know. So, I mean, there's been a couple times where I've been like, this is like, I wish they were a little quieter, but like, it's fine. Everyone I work with is really polite and thoughtful. So.
For sure. Yeah, I asked that because I know that like for myself, like my studio's in my basement, and for me sometimes it's just like so easy to just want to like veer off to the studio and get something done real quick. You know what I mean? So I think you're very smart to just set working hours, and especially if you've got kids. I have a 2-year-old as well, so I've definitely had to get better with my time management as a result of that. But like, having those hours, I think is it just sets an expectation for people too, right? Like for not just for your family, but also for like the artists that like, hey, we're gonna work these hours, figure out what you're gonna do the rest of the day, that kind of thing. It really should make things go smoother, I think.
There's a lot of benefits to it, I think. I mean, the 10 to 7, the way I lay it out is it's an 8-hour day with an hour lunch break, and then we work 10 to 2, and then we break for a lunch, and then we come back and it's 3 to 7. So 2 4-hour blocks of like really focused recording. Usually at 10 a.m. people aren't really thinking about lunch yet. So I like that. I like that we can just like they can go out and get a bagel or some coffee or something like that. And then I just can't stand. I've been in studios or sessions where they start at call times at 11. Everyone shows up. It's 11:30, and like before anything has even been recorded, people are already like talking about lunch, and then it's like it drives me absolutely crazy to like see a session that could have started at 10 and been productive. You could have had a song recorded before lunch. Instead, it's like everyone's hungry and cranky at 1:00 and nothing's gotten done, So I find a lot of benefits to it. And then the hour-long lunch break is like an absolute must for me as the engineer to rest my ears and rest my head, and just kind of sometimes I'll have lunch with the artists, but also since I'm close to home, like they understand when I'm just gonna go in the house and make something real quick, make a salad, and just relax.
Nice. No, I think those are great hours to have, like, because I've definitely, I agree with you. Like, I've definitely been part of those sessions that start at 11 or 11:30, and then, definitely lunch gets in the way. Or you get the people that are just like, well, we're starting later. I already ate lunch. Like, I don't want to eat lunch. Let's keep working through it, right? And so you get that part of it too, right?
Yeah, you want to get a productive day, and then there's also like I never have to talk to a band about dinner plans. It's just like we're done at 7. And I'm going to go eat dinner with my family. Like it's kind of an unspoken thing. And I think that's actually really healthy. And I think that the artist benefits from ending at a reasonable time and stepping away from the process and getting a good night's sleep, having a good dinner, waking up the next morning and being ready to do it all over again, I think is like crucial.
For sure. I also imagine from like an efficiency standpoint, when you know what your deadline is to stop, like you want to work harder to get it done faster. And it's like that, what is it? I can't remember. Is it the Pareto principle or something like that, where it's like work will expand to the time you allot it. So like, if people have all day to do it, they're going to take all day to get it done. Or if they have got months, they're going to take months. Whereas if you give it like hours, you're going to get it done in an hour, so it's, similar concept, right?
Yeah, I might not be someone who's willing to like put in a 12-hour day, but for those 8 hours, like you have my attention. The project has my attention, and I think that's more powerful than the idea of a longer day, getting more bang for your buck or more hours for your buck, but but it's not as focused, you know?
For sure. Yeah, I think this is important to talk about. Like, it's something we don't really talk about or haven't talked about on the podcast too much before. And I think it's something that, like, anyone who's getting into this business and wants to run a studio, it's like, these are real factors that actually affect everything in the studio, from, you know, your mental capacity to the efficiencies of the studio to just like happiness and setting expectations, all that stuff. It's important to really get clear on that stuff early. So yeah, it's good to actually have this conversation and chat about that kind of stuff, because I think people need to hear it and be thinking about it if you're going to get into the studio business.
Yeah, for sure. It's helped me. It's helped me balance, you know?
For sure. And also, I think it's also refreshing to hear that you don't need to be in the big city too. You know, like, everyone always thinks like LA is the big hotspot, you have to be there, but you know, there's definitely the expenses that come along with it. And, you know, the fact that you're close by it, but like, you know, not too far away is definitely like a good thing to have as well with your studio too. So something for people to think about if they don't want to move to a big city.
Yeah. I mean, there's parameters that I feel like need to be in place. Like I was in Orange County with the studio for at least 10 years, you know? So I worked on a lot of records by then. And I felt like by moving up here, it's like, well, at least I'll get like one more record out of all these people I've been like working with recently, you know? I think they'll come up. And then the rest of it was just a little bit of a gamble. And I think it's the best move we ever made as a family and for the studio business.
Love it, man. That's awesome. Well, I'd love to switch gears and talk about your mixing process a little bit, because, man, you make some awesome mixes. So I definitely want to dig into that process there. When it comes to starting a mix, like, what's your normal mindset going into a new mix? Where do you start? How do you start? Do you have a similar process?
I'd say it's a little different depending on whether or not I produce the record or not. But if I produce the record, I'm going into it just trying to enhance what we created in the studio, not trying to like up the level of the production or like, you know, inject some sort of life into the song that wasn't there. Hopefully we captured that like while we were tracking. I do have like a lot of go-tos. Like I've mixed every song for the last like 8 years through Empirical Labs Fatso. Just I've never regretted it once, and it kind of helps me get like my gain staging right. You know, I know like typically like if I'm see the -1 LED just barely lighting up on the quietest passages of the song, and then -3-ish when on the biggest section of the song, I know that I kind of have like my levels are just feeling right, you know. And then I have an Orban stereo spring reverb that I track with for every single song. So that's like kind of like it's just input monitored as a reverb return. So when it comes to mixing, I kind of already have like a lot of my effects like finished, you know, as far as like the mixed into that spring reverb. So yeah, I mean, with mixing, yeah, it's just trying not to like screw up what we created, maybe have a little bit more sense of continuity, like a through line through the record, almost thinking of it like a little bit from a mastering perspective. I do a lot of when I've tracked something, a lot of my processing is global or groups. So like my drums, you might look at my session and it looks like I don't have any plugins on my drums, but I just have them bust to like a drum bus, and I'm doing a lot of my processing there. And then it's also like flooding into like the mix bus chain.
Now, do you feel like you do that because are you adding any processing on the way in that would maybe eliminate the need for a lot of plugins on individual channels?
So Ethan Johns is one of my favorite producers, mixers, and him and Dom Monks, like his engineer, have just been like I just absolutely love their recordings. For like, I remember in high school listening to like a Ben Queller record, and it was an Ethan Johns record, and then Ryan Adams shortly after that, and Whiskey Town, and you know, Kings of Leon, Ray LaMontagne. Laura Marling is my favorite artist ever, and a lot of these artists and Ethan Johns and Dom Monks, it's just not a lot of processing. There's just not a lot of I'm a very like microphone and like source forward producer, engineer. And so when I'm like, a lot of the times, like, I'll even track a drum kit and all my faders in Pro Tools are at 0, and I'm just blending. I'm getting my blend from my input volume. So I'm really trying to like capture the sound of the musician and that kit in that song for that production while I'm getting my levels. So therefore, like, I kind of have the sound of the drum kit. I'm usually going for like a minimally processed thing. Hopefully I picked the right microphones. Hopefully I picked the right arrangement where those drums get to sound good already. And then mixing just becomes a little bit about like I feel like a typical like drum bus might be like a Townhouse, like I think it's called Townhouse SSL like style compressor, just like killing some of like the faster transients, and then, you know, like a UAD Studer, and I just like I'll like flip through the presets really quick with like my eyes closed, and then if something excites me, it's like, okay, cool. So it's like it's the core of what I captured, and then maybe the plugin's doing something that makes it just sit in the mix just like in a more exciting way. So yeah, it's kind of like I feel like the more and more I've made records and the more and more I mix records that I produce, my mix process gets a little bit more minimal. And as I've done that, I've gotten to a place where it's like, oh, I can compare my record to like an Ethan Johns record or something like that, and I feel pretty good about myself. You know, it's like I wasn't referencing this record while I was making, you know, the recording, but now that it's done and I can put on my favorite like Laura Marling record or put on the record I just finished, and they feel like they're coming from a similar ethos or a similar place, then I'm like, okay, I'm staying true to what I've loved for like pretty much my whole life. And hopefully, of course, this is all assuming that me and the artist bonded on that vision very early on. So yeah, I mean, mixing, that's mixing when I've produced it. Mixing when someone else has produced it, I think the first thing I go to is like organizing and just like putting tracks where I usually expect them to be in my sessions and doing a little color coding. Like, of course, bass needs to be brown and vocal needs to be purple and backup vocals are pink. I'm sure everyone has their own kind of like preference on that sort of thing. But that's helpful for me because especially when it's a new session and I'm just importing, you know, audio tracks, it kind of starts to feel like home, or like they're just quick indicators of like, oh, there's the electric guitars, there's the bass, this is what I'm looking at, you know, this is what the song with the arrangement is, and that kind of helps with that.
Makes sense. Man, I just think it's so refreshing to hear your take on this, because I mean, it sounds like your mixing process goes a lot easier when you're tracking, because you're taking all the time early to get the sounds right at the source, which is important. But I thought it was really interesting that you were kind of talking about just really keeping it minimal on the way in. And I think that's just interesting, because I feel like so many people feel the need these days, especially with like the ability to just add plugin after plugin. Like, so many people feel this need to like add so much stuff to their mixes and to over process stuff. So it is really refreshing to hear you just talk about like really just focusing on getting the mic positioning right, or, you know, getting the choosing the right gear and all that stuff. Like, there's a lot that you can do with very little, and anyone who listens to your mixes is going to hear that ability there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, one of the best things I ever did for my studio was I have 12 channels of API 3124V preamps, like the 4-channel ones with the output control. And it's just my minimalist API console. You know?
It sets your limit for how much you can put in there.
Yeah, it's 12 channels, and there's input and output gain, and there's a lot of tone and a lot of levels of compression or saturation within that range, you know? It's like, it's API. Like, if the record isn't sounding great, it's the microphone or the source or the arrangement sucks. You know, it's like I'm not thinking about like I remember I used to make lists the night before a session, and they would drive me absolutely crazy, like just so neurotic about like it's like, okay, I have 2 channels of A designs, you know, blah blah blah, and that has a really nice low end, so like that's got to go on the kick. And then it's like, but now like my rack toms are like my like Trident pre's, and like I don't like those, and blah blah blah. And I just, when I got these committed to these APIs, my life got so much easier when it comes to like I can just roll into like a session, and we just kind of come up with what we're recording and the arrangement. And I know like my first 12 channels are API, and then I do have 2 channels of Neve 1073s with the EQ like reissues, but they're like Neve brand. And then I have this old Altec mono console, and I have 2 channels of that wired up. So my studio is like 16 channel studio, 12 API, 2 Neve, 2 Altec. And that's been really helpful to stay minimal and stay focused on the source. Not be like, I never audition pre's ever with an artist in the room. Like, I mean, it's going to be the API, and then if that's not working, I'm going to plug in something else real quick. And I think that's like, I do not miss the days of asking someone to sing a song 4 or 5 times while I try out 4 or 5 pre's. Like, I just can't. I can't imagine doing that to someone anymore.
I love that, man. I totally relate to that. And as you're saying that, I'm looking in front of me, and I've got my 500 series stuff and all my preamps and everything. And I've got like pairs of everything. And I feel that pressure, that stress too, of like every time I record, it's like, which one am I going to use for the kick in or kick out? Or, you know, it's like figuring out what are the benefits. And it is super overwhelming. And I never really thought of it until you just mentioned it. Like every time I do go to a studio that just has a console, I love the fact that there's no options. That's what it is.
Doesn't it just feel good? It's like, as long as it's like, just like, I mean, I get it. Like I get the tinkering, like, and like very fine detailed gear focus with a lot of people, because I've been there like really strong. I mean, like in the guitar amp days, like it's like I know 12AX7, 12AU7, you know, EL84s and Mollard and Telefunken and blah, 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 and G12M speakers and Blue. And, you know, I can very easily be that like nerdy, like very fine detailed person. But for me personally, I found that comes with a good amount of neuroticism and anxiety and stress, that I want to do everything in my life to rid myself of those feelings. And like, there's a lot of like stress that comes with making a record, even with like a really talented person and a really great player. And I've spent a lot of time trying to like eliminate as many of those factors as possible to make a recording process for me and my naturally anxious tendencies just like, let's get those out of here, you know. Like I don't need those variables. I don't want them. I don't care about them. And that was kind of like a good thing I did for the studio, for sure, and for myself.
So then, with so much emphasis being put on mic selection and positioning early on, do you have a big mic collection, or is it the same sort of deal there? Or okay.
I do, and I just love microphones. Like that doesn't make me anxious. It only makes me anxious when I only have one, I guess, and I wish I had 3 or something, you know. Yeah, I really love my microphones. You know, I have Coles 4038s and a vintage U87 and a pair of KSM 32s, Soyuz Bomblet, old D12. And I actually just bought the first piece of gear from my studio in like probably 2 or 3 years. I just got it like 2 weeks ago. I ordered an Upton 251 tube mic, and I only did that because I kept borrowing my bandmates. And I just like, every time I made a record and I borrowed that mic, I just like absolutely loved it. And I was like, I'm sold, like I'm not buying this and like gonna try it out. Like I know I'm in. So.
And was it as good as his?
I think so. I've thought about that. I try not to think about those things, I've tried and put that out of my head. I also have my 87, my U87 is in 1986. It's like the last year they ever made the original circuit. And he bought one too. Like we basically, like me and him have like clones of like our studios. He has it like on a slightly smaller scale because he doesn't record other people as much, but he has the API, he has the Neve, he has the Orban, he has the U87 and the 251. So me and him hear things very similarly. And I think his 87 might sound like a tiny bit more like brilliant and open than mine, but I've never shot them out on the same source because I don't want to know.
Fair.
Yeah.
I remember like I had an old boss who had like a massive snare collection, and every time I'd record, he'd just lend me all of his snares. And there was this one Black Beauty in particular that like, no matter, he can give me like 20 snares, and that was always the one that would make it on every record. And I tried to buy it from him so many times and like offered him like triple the price of what it's worth, but he refuses to sell. So eventually at some point I was like, I got to get a Black Beauty. And it sounds good, but not
it's
like
not
that.
The same.
There's,
I know.
So, yeah.
I mean, there's
a magic sometimes in certain pieces.
Things. There is, but yeah, I ordered it brand new, and like I said, it's the first piece of gear I've ordered in a long time, and got a good deal on it. And it was cool because I actually called the number on their website the other day because I wanted to know what kind of tube was in it. I just bought a collection of about 1,000 tubes at an estate sale, and I wanted to set some aside for that microphone. And sure enough, like Dallas Upton just like picks up the phone, and we just like chatted for a little bit, and it was a reminder of like, some of the small boutique companies, like just that like personal touch is really great, and made me like the microphone all that much more, that he was just like a friendly guy and willing to nerd out about tubes for a little bit,
That's awesome. Love that kind of stuff. So going into the mix then, you were talking about how you primarily like to mix on the buses, and it sounds like that's probably because, yeah, like if you're designing that sound right at the source, then the amount of the attack that you're going to have on a kick versus the snare and all that, like you've already factored all that stuff in, and you've got your your balance of the frequencies on the individual channels. But what kind of processing do you typically find yourself doing on individual buses? Is it just like more broad stroke kind of shelving EQs and stuff like that, or are you getting a little bit more surgical with that stuff?
Yeah, there's a lot of high pass filtering, like that's a
more
big
cleanup
part of
than
my
anything.
mixing. Yeah, just clean up. Because I'm not usually, like when I'm tracking, I'm not usually filtering a ton because I don't have a lot of EQs. So if the microphone doesn't have a filter, chances are that bottom end's pretty wide open. And a lot of it is, I mean, we have so many cool like tone shaping tools these days, like the Ampex ATR 102, I think it is, like the UAD plugin, and the Studer, the matching Studer, the 800. I really love those plugins because I think that they maintain what I intended to capture, but you kind of like what I was talking about with the pre's, with just the parameters within that plugin, you can get a lot of compression or tone variation or saturation that sometimes all you need EQ wise to make something like sit in the mix. I know like right off the top of my head, like the Ampex for me, when I put that on, I'm thinking mostly of mid-range and top end. I feel like it keeps the low end relatively neutral, whereas the Studer, a lot of the presets on that really, really extend the low end. They can, like there's like a jazz preset on there that I feel like can like drop the low end like an extra octave on a lot of things. There's like there's presets, and it's funny because I've never like saved a preset myself. Like I've never like made a preset but I think presets are super fun. I love just like flipping through really quick and just seeing what it does to my source. I get to remember some of these preset names and what they did for me on a certain project. So if I feel like it's time to mix and like, it's like, you know what? This like low end just really doesn't extend enough. Instead of reaching for an EQ, a lot of times I'll reach for like the Studer and I'll click that preset on, because there's a couple of them that'll do that like lower, like big extension thing. And sometimes you'll find one of the three, you know, it makes it fit just right. And then now you don't have to touch the bass guitar at all, because you just put this Studer on the drum bus and it dropped the kick an extra like octave lower, you know, or at least it feels that way. So yeah, those are the kinds of plugins I'm messing around with a lot. Aberrant Sketch Cassette is like one of the best plugins I've ever bought, because I'm not using it to try and emulate cassette or tape. I'm using it for the compression and EQ and the saturation that you can get from that. So a lot of times, like my EQ might be like a fab filter with the low end filtered out, and like just like a tiny bump, like a, you know, whatever, 3-5 dB bump somewhere where I felt like I wanted it to shine a little bit more in the mix. And then I feel like the only time I ever get surgical is when there's like really hard like overtones on a vocal. You know, you get that like one frequency that like is just 20 dB louder than like every other frequency in the vocal when they hit a certain note or something like that. That's like the kind of the general tools that I'm using on individual tracks. I do see, like, I'm thinking like UAD 1176 a lot, and again, like I'll pick the blue stripe if I want a little bit more top end, if I want it to remain a little more neutral or stay mid-rangey, I'll pick like the blackface one. And yeah, those are kind of like the tools that I tend to see a lot in my sessions.
That's so fascinating. Like that, instead of EQ, you're leaning on these other tools, and it definitely, like with a lot of those tools, like the you talked about the Ampex, like it can be subtle shifts, but it definitely does make a difference, even if you just switch between like the different tape formulas that are on that plugin. Like, you know, when you really start to like focus in, you can start to hear those differences, and it is cool what you're saying. I'm just like knowing like, okay, this, you know, this tape model is going to give me a little bit more mid-range or, you know, brightness or whatever. So it really just comes down to like really learning the gear and listening to it a lot and paying attention to those minor details. And yeah, some of the presets are obviously like much more blown out than others, but yeah, I mean, a lot of these tools, like the effect of them, even choosing a blue stripe versus a blackface 1176, like it's not that massive of a difference, but it's doing something, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes if I need a vocal just to like pop a little bit more, the blue stripe is all I need. Just picking the right compressor, because I know that compressor comes with a little bit of a tonal shift. And then it saves me from having 10 plugins on my vocal, just because I didn't need to like pull up a Moog like Airband or something like that, you know, because I kind of just got it out of the fab filter and the blue stripe going together or something, you know.
For sure. It's interesting hearing you talk about this process, because like when I listen to your tracks, one of the things that stands out to me is that like I think you do a great job of creating space in a mix for certain elements to live. Like, and for example, like I feel like sometimes it's about creating contrast in some cases, where maybe you have darker drums to make room for like the brightness of a vocal or something like that. It just feels like everything in your tracks has its own slot. And it's interesting hearing you talk about this and not really leaning on EQ to achieve that, because I think that's what most people think of. You know, they think they have to use like complementary EQ and that kind of stuff. But you know, is that something that you're very conscious of, like during the tracking stage, is like giving each instrument its own slot and maybe choosing microphones or positioning to give you that frequency contrast?
100%. Very, very like important to me. Even panning. I mean, usually when I'm producing and I'm building out a track, like where I stick it panning wise is where it's going to be in the final mix, and that choice plus the microphone choice plus the instrument choice are all like a concrete factor for me. So it's like I already know I'm going to pan this instrument left, and it has this like kind of, stringy, airy quality to it. It's like chances are I'm going to want to, the next move in the arrangement is going to be to balance out that source with something else on like the right speaker and maybe capture it with the same microphone. So now I have the same like top end coming out of the left and right speakers, but they're actually different sources. Yeah, some choices like that are very important to me because I don't intend on recreating that source at any given point. Unless the artist like asks for it, then it's like, yes. But I might explain to them, it's like, oh, so you now in the mix 2, you wanted me to pan this center in it. This whole time we were working on the record, it was pan left. And I was like, now I don't really have like something to put on the left speaker, because it's not like we recorded 10 things and now I can just put them wherever. It's like, no, we only recorded 4 things for this arrangement, and they kind of had their home. So that's the trade-off. Like, and usually I won't go into that conversation. I'll just do what they tell me to do, and I'll find a solution. Maybe now that I don't have anything to put on the left speaker and they want me to pan that acoustic guitar center, maybe now I will send the wet signal of that acoustic to only the left side of my Orban Spring reverb, and now there's some reverb over there. There's something happening. There's a little splash on the left side that wasn't there before. I like symmetry, but I like contrast as well. I think that a lot of contrast, I've never thought about it this way, but a lot of contrast down the center image, because everything's panned to the center. And then on the left and right sides, I like a lot of symmetry. I like a lot of like complementary tones and a lot of a little bit more cohesion, I guess, on the left and right sides.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's like creating contrast is like front to back and symmetry is your left to right, and thinking of it in that like 3-dimensional kind of approach, right?
Totally. Like that makes a lot of sense to me when I try and put into words like what I'm thinking when I'm arranging something, both song wise and like feel wise, but also like EQ wise,
Mm-hmm. So then what about with like denser mixes? How do you go about finding those contrasts in that kind of scenario where, maybe you have a lot more fighting for the same space in the stereo field?
Yeah, I love records that have a lot going on too. I think I'm okay with less separation than some people feel like they need. And I think a lot of that's more like due to like a modern production style. Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to like picking which elements I want to extend into the low end, which ones I don't want to have any low end, and which ones I want to accent like the top end. And I feel like if the arrangement's good, usually the mid-range kind of finds its own place, or panning can help with that, if the mid-range is getting just overtaken. And then, there's so many cool, like just kind of like wall of sound records where it's like, it's nice that you don't hear like every little detail of every instrument. Like it's the mush of them that is kind of fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like you've mentioned arrangement a bunch of times, and I think that is a really important factor that a lot of people just don't think about. It's like they try to cram a bunch of stuff in all at once, and if you do that, then yeah, it makes it harder to create contrast, and versus like sometimes just simplifying things makes it so easy to get that separation because you can pan things apart and you have like less fighting for bright versus dark and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I've definitely told like artists like, oh, like, yeah, let's try that idea, but like, I don't know if I have space for it. Like, I'll just tell them that. Like, we already have our stuff down the middle. We already have this left and right stuff. Just like, I tell them, like, I don't know where I'm going to put this, but let's try it, like, and then sometimes that problem leads to a creative solution. So like I welcome that sort of thing. I welcome that sort of like curveball, but my initial response might be like, I don't know if I have, like, I feel like I've already filled the cup. It's overflowing, like, so it's a problem to solve at that point.
For sure. Yeah. Well, another thing I was curious to ask you about is that I feel you also do a really great job of handling longer reverbs in a mix. And when I listen to like Coma Culture or Jacob Wright, like those records in particular, like to me, they feel like you managed to find a way of getting the reverbs to have length and sustain, but without making a mix feel muddy and cluttered, which can often happen with a lot of longer reverbs. So I was curious to learn a little bit more about your approach with that and how you go about, making space for reverbs to still be there and provide the character that they're there for, but without making it sound muddy.
Yeah, I think Coma Culture is interesting because that's my band, and the other two members in the band are members in the band Young the Giant, and so they've worked with like a variety of producers and techniques and stuff like that. And Coma Culture's fun because I felt like that's an interesting record that kind of goes against a lot of what I've been saying in this whole conversation, because it was very much like an experiment in tone and just like playful. I think because the other members in the band, they were always just telling me like, all right, that's cool, but do it more, like more longer reverb, more saturation. And and then I was on the other end. I was very like detailed with like playing with like tape machines and that sort of tonal side of things. But the reverbs, I guess I'm very selective with reverbs. Man, the Coma Culture one's just so hard to like touch on because I mixed that at home like during the first month of COVID in my living room with the air conditioner on, like the noisy like wall unit, and my kids, my 3-year-olds, like running around the house. Like I mixed that record in a completely untreated like space. And I had to use a lot more plugins because I didn't want to go to my studio because I was terrified of the world at that time. And I did at one point I did like brave it back to my studio, and I did mix the rest of the record through a tape machine, through a 1/4-inch tape machine. But like the mixes were pretty much like approved at that point between me and the band members. But so that record doesn't have a lot of my Orban spring reverb. So I was experimenting with plugins, which I usually don't even like touch reverb plugins. It's kind of rare that I find a reverb plugin that I like. But then like Jacob Wright, I feel like that's one of the first records where I was like leaning really heavily on the Orban. And the Orban only has 1 decay time. So, and I've used it on like hundreds of songs in the last like 7 or 8 years since I've had it. And I even have a piece of tape over the settings, so it's just always the same. So I don't know. I think maybe the fact that I'm introducing that reverb from the very start of every session, I'm like, it's part of my arrangement. It's part of the space that I'm pushing into. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe I'm like, I don't know. It feels strange because I don't think about decay times really because of that reverb. I just like let it do its thing, But the Coma Culture, I mean, there's some like 10-second decay times on that record for sure. it's kind of ridiculous.
I mean, it's very interesting though, because yeah, it makes sense if you're tracking with that reverb on, then it is like part of the vibe of the record. So everything is going to fit around it, and you're hearing it. You're always hearing it in context, as opposed to what most people do is just like track everything dry and then throw the reverbs on later, and then you're really having to shape a reverb around what's already there instead of the other way around. So yeah, that's very interesting. Do you ever find yourself like using any sort of like EQ or sidechaining on reverbs at all, or because you're tracking on the way in with it, you don't really need that?
No, yeah, I don't touch it. Maybe on plug-in reverbs, I do. I think plug-in reverbs have like, a lot of them have a crazy big low end that is like completely not necessary unless you want it. But like Valhalla, like vintage verb, like I actually really like that plugin, but the low end on that's like massive. Like it extends like full frequency, whereas I feel like an old piece of gear, plates have a big low end, but I feel like it's like there's a couple songs on the Coma Culture record where because it was COVID and there was it was kind of that time of like supporting your friends remotely, I sent some tracks to like my friends that had plates. So there's like multiple different plates on that record. And I remember one of them had this massive low end that just like made the low end of the song. Like the kick drum didn't have that much low end, but now that we sent it through the plate, like now the song had low end. So yeah, but yeah, plug-in reverbs have a lot of, I could see them needing more EQ to like rein them in.
For sure. So then when it comes to like choosing the right type of reverb, because that's another thing I think you do really well too. It's kind of a contrast to my previous question, but I also feel like you do a good job of knowing when to keep something maybe with a bit of a shorter, slappier sound as opposed to something longer. So when it comes to choosing reverb types, how do you normally make that decision of when your spring reverb is a better choice than like a plate reverb or a hall verb or any digital verb there?
I mean, hopefully the spring reverb just works for everything, but it doesn't.
They have a lot of character, so that's what's cool about them. They definitely create a vibe right away.
Yeah, and I've just had so many people in this studio. It's just like as soon as I start creeping up like that send into the reverb, they're like, "Ooh, like that sounds beautiful," you know? And I feel like I just don't really get that reaction with a lot of plugins, but I think it depends if I need the source to be stereo or mono. Like, I think Pro Tools has that Black Spring, that mono one is actually really nice on like mono sources that you are okay with sounding kind of small. Mega Verb by Goodhertz is like my go-to 80s like modern reverb with like long decay times and brightness. And then Valhalla reverb is my go-to for like when I don't want splashiness and I want like just a little bit more of like a cavernous tone, you know? I think Valhalla, yeah, that vintage verb's like killer. I usually just use it on like the opening setting and then I roll off the low end immediately. And I think it starts at like 4 seconds decay time or something like that, and I might dial that back a little bit, but it kind of just depends on the song.
Totally. Yeah. The Valhalla stuff's awesome. And yeah, I'm kind of with you as well. Like I find I'm constantly cutting low end out of reverbs, like especially with digital reverbs. Just too much for whatever reason. But hey, I mean, I guess it's better to have it and then cut it than not have it and need it, you know?
Yeah. My spring doesn't have subs, you know, like it doesn't have sub lows, which is just crazy to me that like a lot of those like plates do and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I just got really lucky with that reverb. It kind of made my life just like so much easier. I think it really like lends itself to the style of music that I like to work on as well.
Nice. So then with so much focus on like keeping things minimal, getting it right at the source, and then, yeah, mixing with kind of a minimalist approach there as well. How do you ultimately know when you're done with a mix? Because I feel like sometimes when you're doing less in the mix, it almost makes it harder to know because you feel like you need to do more sometimes. So I'm curious to get your take on that.
I guess it just has to be like a feeling thing. It's like, I've done my due diligence. Have I made this song? Have I enhanced this song and not heard it? Was I present for the given amount of time that I wanted to spend on this mix that I'm essentially, I mean, it's not very artistic, but the time that I'm getting paid for, you know, I'm not going to spend 2 days on a mix. Like if the client comes back to me with like serious notes, I'm gonna take it past the finish line. I'm gonna make sure that they're happy, but I'm not gonna get to that like neurotic part of the process. Like I mentioned earlier, I just want to know that I showed up, I ate well, I was present, and did the best I could that day.
Fair. Well, it kind of ties back to what we talked about at the beginning of, just setting your hours and working within that. And yeah, I think it makes sense. It's just like working efficiently with the time you have given yourself and making the most out of it.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time with when you're producing an artist, that there's like diminishing returns at some point. Like it doesn't help that artist to do the 14th take of that song. You either need to like put a pin in it and come back to it, or realize that take 3 was the good one. Because like it's same with mixing. It's like it's a performance. It's how you showed up that day and what you brought to the table. And you wouldn't cheer on an artist for being like, you know what, great for you. Like you came back to this song, to this live performance, like 6 days in a row, and on like the 6th day at midnight, you finally got the take. Like great for you. Like it's like, no, like I would tell the person like, dude, you're driving yourself fucking crazy. Like do not do that. Play another song don't even touch this song for a week, like you're going to come back to it and you're going to lose that anxiousness that you've built over those 6 days, and you're going to be able to actually perform the song again, So yeah, I think that's valuable to keep in mind when, as a mixer, like don't do that to yourself. It doesn't, I don't think it's not going to crack the code. It's not going to make the world of a difference.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah,
absolutely. So then at the end of the day for you, what ultimately makes a great sounding mix?
There's no wrong mix. There's no wrong EQ curve to a mix. Like there are so many incredible records that just sound completely different from each other. Like completely different mid-range, completely different low end, completely different like vocal approach. And that's like the identity of that record and that producer and that band and that mixer during that span of time. And I think it's important to like remember that and not pull up a ton of records and like compare the record you're making to like all these different mixes, because there's no like right or wrong answer there at all. I think a good mix doesn't hurt a song or a performance. Like I don't want to like hear like a beautiful vocal performance that's just like so oversaturated or so like boosted in the top end that now it's like distracting to listen to. I don't want to hear something that's like so saturated unless it's like really lending to the emotion of the track or the feeling of, like, I think of like Neutral Milk Hotel, like that record. I think it's Airplane Over the Sea, or at least that's one of the songs. That record is like so incredibly loud and blown out, and like I don't know if that came like early on in the process or in the mastering process, but I think it's just like it's so perfect for like a band like that to like have it so fucked up, and I would imagine that that's like what their live show felt like in like just some sweaty like 100-person room in the 90s. So I love that. I love that that's like a tonal fuck up that like really, that's like a strong choice that enhances the record. I don't like unnecessarily strong choices that don't like complement an arrangement or an artist. So I think it's like those kinds of things that make a good mix to me. It's like, this is intriguing, this is not distracting, and this isn't like harmful to the song. I guess I like just things that feel a little bit more timeless, but I also get excited by some mixes sometimes, you know. Sean Everett's an interesting person to me because I feel like he can make those like big, bold decisions. But then you also hear like a record like the most like recent Killers records that he did, and that I think I read that he had to mix it on a console instead of like in the box. But yeah, Sean Everett's interesting because he can make these big, bold choices on records. But then you hear like the most recent Killers record he did, which I believe he mixed it on the console that they tracked it on. And like that record sounds so cool to me. It doesn't sound like Sean Everett being bored. It just sounds like Sean Everett like using fewer tools. And I think that that's like really cool. And then like he's done some records with Julian Casablancas and the Voids. Like those records are like so like just so interesting sounding, and they kind of like go against what I usually love in a music or like in a mix, but it's like fascinating and like sounds so cool to me. So yeah, I don't know, man. I guess it just comes down to like, does it represent the essence of the artist? That's probably the simplest way to put like whether I like enjoy a mix or not, you know.
Love that, man. I think that's a great answer. I love that you led with that. There is no wrong EQ curve to a mix, because I think that that's something that, like, obviously if you want it to sound like something else, then yeah, you have to chase that curve a little bit. But it's refreshing to hear that too, because, you know, people, especially guitar players and stuff like that, I always find they're so fascinated with their tone and like fixated on trying to get it sounding amazing. But it's like every record has different guitar tones. There's no one right guitar tone. So once you start to like accept it and lean into the fact that like different can be cool, then you're going to get cool tones. You're going to have something that uniquely sounds like you. And I think that that's really important for people to lean into sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I think my goal as a producer in general is just to like walk away with a record that sounds like the person that like I've spent time with in that studio, meaning the artist. Like, I just want to know that like I didn't infringe on like their identity. Hopefully we collaborated in a sense that they felt like what I brought to the table like enhanced or like truly understood what they were trying to convey or trying to express personally. But I think that kind of ties in, that makes sense to me, like what my answer is for the mixing side of things as well, because it's just an extension of that.
Absolutely, man. Well, dude, I think that's a great spot to wrap things up here. If people want to learn more about you, follow you online, or maybe even work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, Instagram's a pretty good way to like kind of keep up with me. I feel like my website isn't up to date. John O'Brien Recording. Yeah, Instagram's a good way to kind of keep tabs on like what I'm doing, because I'll post like stories when a band's here or something like that. And yeah, they can reach out to me on my website. I think that's johnobrien.recording.com. And my email's there. And yeah, just I love to hear demos and like, you know, just an idea of like the artist's like favorite records. That's always like the first questions I ask, because that's how we can kind of like start a good conversation about what we would make together.
Love it, man. That's awesome. Well, I'll definitely include notes, and I'll include those links in the show notes as well for people. John, thank you again for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And definitely really refreshing to hear your perspective on a lot of this, and just, you know, focusing on the minimalism and keeping things simple. I think that's it's an important lesson that people, I think, intrinsically know is possible, but like it's hard sometimes to falling back on that and remembering that. And yeah, it definitely an important lesson here today. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun putting some of my thoughts into words, because I don't talk about it often. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Glad to help you through that.
Yeah.
Right on, man. So that was my conversation with Jonathan O'Brien, and I just thought that was really refreshing to focus on that idea of minimalism. And it's really interesting because we've had a lot of people come on the podcast and talk about getting it right at the source, but often it involves like adding extra processing on the way in, or EQ, compression, that kind of stuff. And kind of like, I'm not going to say that people are rushing through the process, but often we're augmenting what our source tones are at the beginning so that there's less to do later on. And there's no right or wrong. I mean, whether you do that or you do what John does here and just really spend the time focusing on mic positioning and getting the instrument right and the performance right, all of that kind of stuff. It's really interesting to hear Jonathan talk about just how much you can get away with just miking, And yeah, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. But in the end, you're going to end up with less work to do later on. And it's just really fascinating to hear how far he's able to take these recordings without a lot of extra processing. Yeah, he talked about how he does do some stuff, but he does keep it very minimal. And I just think that that's a really good reminder that you don't need to go overboard with this stuff. You don't need to have the latest and greatest plugins. You don't need to have a ton of EQs and compressors and all that kind of stuff, or even plugins. If you just take the time to really focus on getting good at the craft of miking stuff, the results can be incredible. So yeah, it's just a great reminder to just tap into those basics. And again, if you want to add some extra EQ or compression or processing, whatever, that's fine. But try to focus on getting it right before you add all of that stuff. And you might be surprised at how good the results can be. So yeah, I just thought that was really refreshing to hear. I also really enjoyed learning more about his hybrid style of studio where bands are literally sleeping in the garage there. And it's interesting because I think he brought up a lot of really good reasons for why having a studio like that can actually lead to better results. And it also helps you with maintaining a saner lifestyle, balancing with family, keeping everyone on track as far as their focus and just getting stuff done, being efficient. All of those things are really important in the studio and in life. So having this hybrid style of approach with his studio is pretty cool to learn about. And the fact that he's having so much success with it outside of a major city, and the fact that actually most of his clients, if not all of them these days, are from that major city is also very fascinating too. So yeah, just if you're someone who is thinking like, I don't live in the big city, I don't want to live in the big city, what can I do? Do I have to go online or whatever? This might be an interesting approach to running a studio business that can be pretty successful. So yeah, I'm just really grateful that Jonathan took the time to come on here and talk about all these things, and definitely some things to think about as a result of this episode. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know I definitely did. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And when it comes to your productions, if you're not sure of what you need to do to help you get the results that you want, and you're not sure of how to position your microphones, like Jonathan was talking about here, to get the sounds at the source and to dial in the settings and get your instrument ready, get the right performance. And then ultimately, once you've got those performances all captured, how do you edit them? How do you mix them? If you're not sure of what to do there, you're feeling stuck and you're just not quite getting the results you want, I would absolutely love to help you out. And inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, that's exactly what I do. I work one-on-one with my students to help figure out what it is that you want your tracks to sound like, and then we reverse engineer that process. We figure out what mics you're going to use, what techniques, and I'm there in your corner walking you through every stage of this production process, even hopping on calls with you and mixing with you to make sure that in the end, you get the sound you want, and you also end up with a simple, repeatable process that you can apply to all of the songs that you work on in the future. So again, if you're looking for one-on-one help to help you get better results, work on feeling way more confident in your process, and have a repeatable process that you can move forward with all of your tracks, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And that's where you can find all the details there. And on that page, there's a link where you can hop on a call with me. I'd love to learn more about the music you're making, the struggles that you're facing, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and ultimately see if I can help. And if I can, I'd love to invite you into the program and we can talk about what that would look like. Or if you're not the right fit, or I don't think I can help you, I'll let you know. I only work with people who I truly believe I can help. So once again, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude, and you get all the details there, and let's hop on a call together. And with that said, we're at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Later. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.